My name is Saoirse Bryant. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end. I want to start with 11 minutes. Not an hour, not a day. 11 minutes. Because that's exactly how long the world was perfect before everything began to unravel. It was a Wednesday evening in late October, the kind of night that smells like wood smoke and dried leaves, when the temperature drops just enough that you want to stay inside with something warm in your hands. I was standing at our kitchen stove in our small rental house in Harlow, North Carolina, stirring a pot of soup I'd been making from memory, my grandmother's recipe, the one I'd written on a paper towel once and somehow never lost. Declan came in from the back door. I heard him kick his boots off in the mudroom, heard the familiar sound of him washing his hands at the utility sink, that particular rhythm of water and soap and the rough scrub of a man who works with his hands. He did furniture restoration, antiques mostly. He had a workshop in the back of our property that always smelled like linseed oil and old walnut. I didn't hear him come up behind me. I just felt his hand on my shoulder, light, the way he touched things he didn't want to startle. I turned around. He was holding a ring, not in a box, not on a velvet cushion, just in his palm the way you'd hold something small and important that you didn't want to drop. It was a simple band with a small oval stone. He told me later he'd found the setting at an estate sale, had cleaned it and polished the metal himself, spent 8 months saving for the stone. He didn't have a speech prepared. I know because he told me that too, after. He said he'd tried to write one and thrown it away 3 times. What he said instead was this: I'm not good at words, but I know one thing for certain. I want every morning to start with you standing at the stove making something that smells like that. I said yes before he finished the sentence. We sat down on the kitchen floor afterward. I don't know whose idea it was, but that's where we ended up. Backs against the cabinet beneath the sink, my head on his shoulder, his arm around me. I kept lifting my hand under the light and watching the stone catch it, turning it slow, the way you turn something over in your mind when you're trying to make sure it's real. For 11 minutes, nothing existed outside that kitchen. Then my phone rang. The name on the screen was Mom. I picked up, still smiling. I couldn't help it. I was 27 years old and I'd just gotten engaged and I wanted to tell someone. I didn't get the chance. Where are you having it? My mother said. No hello, no congratulations, no gasp of joy. Just, where are you having it? The venue, Saoirse. Good venues book out 18 months in advance. You need to start calling tomorrow. Actually, give me the names you're considering and I'll call tonight. I looked at Declan. He'd tilted his head just slightly, listening to the voice coming through the phone. His jaw shifted. That particular small movement I'd learned to recognize, the one that meant he was holding something back. Mom, I said. He literally just, I know, and it's wonderful. I'm sure it's wonderful. But feelings don't book venues, Saoirse. Let me handle the calls. That's what mothers are for. I should explain something about my mother, Emma Bryant. She is not a cruel woman. She is not a villain in the way people imagine villains. She doesn't raise her voice often, doesn't slam doors or throw things. Her particular brand of control is softer than that, and it has always been softer than that, which is exactly what makes it so hard to see clearly. My father, Hugh Bryant, died suddenly when I was 18 years old. It was the December of my first semester at university, the kind of death that comes without warning. A heart attack at 51, a man who had never been sick a day in his life, who had been standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes when it happened. I was 300 miles away in a dormitory room when my mother called. I came home for the funeral. I stayed through Christmas. And when I finally went back to school in January, my mother stood at the airport security line and said something I have thought about almost every day since. It's just us now, baby. You're all I have. She said it quietly. She said it with her eyes wet and her voice steady, the way she always managed to be steady in exactly the wrong moments. And from that day forward, saying no to my mother felt like abandoning a widow in a dark house. So when she said she'd handle the venue calls, I heard myself say, "Okay, Mom, that would actually be helpful." Declan was watching me from across the kitchen. He didn't say anything that night, but later, lying in bed, I felt him staring at the ceiling in the dark, and I knew, in the way you know things about the person you've slept next to for 2 years, that his silence was not peace, it was patience. And patience, I would learn, has a limit. The thing about a slow takeover is that you don't feel it happening. You only recognize it afterward. The way you recognize the shape of a wave only after it's already crashed over you. My mother didn't seize control of the wedding in a single conversation. She did it across 3 months, one small, reasonable-sounding step at a time. The first week after the engagement, she offered to make a few phone calls to venues because I was busy with my 3rd grade class in the middle of a particularly demanding stretch before winter break. That was reasonable. I was busy. The 3rd week, she showed up to a catering tasting I had scheduled for a Saturday afternoon. A tasting I had mentioned to her casually on the phone, not as an invitation. She arrived 12 minutes before I did, already seated at the table, already chatting with the owner. I was in the area, she said, smiling. By the end of the 2nd month, she had changed the primary contact number on the florist's account from my cell phone to hers. I didn't discover this until the florist called her, not me, with a question about delivery timing, and my mother relayed the information to me the next evening as if she were a secretary passing along a message. Dawn at Magnolia said they can do the setup by 10, she told me on the phone. I told her that was fine. Mom, why does the florist have your number? Because you never answer during school hours. It was practical. I had wanted wildflowers for the centerpieces. Black-eyed Susans and lavender and baby's breath, loose and unstructured, the way flowers look when they're actually growing somewhere rather than arranged. It was the kind of thing my grandmother had always had on her kitchen table. Nothing expensive, nothing fussy, just alive. My mother ordered white lilies. They're elegant, she said. You'll thank me when you see the photographs. I had wanted barbecue for the reception dinner, brisket and pulled pork and cornbread and sweet tea served in mason jars, because that was what Patricia Mercer, Declan's mother, made every Sunday after church, and the smell of it was woven into some of the warmest memories Declan had of his childhood. I wanted our wedding food to feel like his family. I wanted it to feel like home. My mother booked a seafood buffet. You can't serve barbecue at a wedding reception, she said, with such finality that it sounded like a law she was quoting. People will talk. Let them talk, I said. And then, because old habits are stronger than new resolve. But okay, we can talk about it. We never talked about it. The seafood was confirmed the following week. The seating chart was the thing that should have made me understand how far it had gone. I had designed it with Declan's family in the front rows, his mother Patricia, his cousins, his Aunt Margaret, who was flying in from Oregon, his elderly neighbor Mrs. Paulson, who had been like a grandmother to him since his own grandparents died. These were the people I wanted in his eye line when he stood at the altar and watched me walk toward him. I found the revised chart on my kitchen table one evening. My mother had let herself in with the spare key I'd given her for emergencies, and the front 4 rows had been reassigned. Declan's family was moved to row 6, rows 1 through 4, my mother's friends from church, the women from her neighborhood book club, a cousin I had met twice in my life. When I said something, gently, because gently was the only gear I had, my mother's face shifted, not into anger, into something worse. Her eyes went glassy. Her chin wobbled just slightly, just enough. She reached into her cardigan pocket and produced a tissue she already had there, which told me, somewhere beneath the part of my brain still trying to be a good daughter, that the tissue had been ready. I'm only trying to make this beautiful for you, she said. Your father would have wanted something like this, something dignified. And I folded. I folded the way I always folded, quickly, completely, with the specific guilt of someone who had been trained since the age of 18 to understand that her mother's grief was partly her responsibility. Declan was spending more evenings in his workshop. He said nothing about it, and I didn't ask. I told myself he was busy with a commission he'd taken on, a Victorian secretary desk for a client in Asheville. But sometimes I'd glance out the kitchen window at the light on in the workshop and I'd see his silhouette through the glass, not moving, just standing at his workbench with his hands resting on it and his head slightly bowed. He wasn't building anything in those moments. He was waiting for something. I didn't know what yet. One evening in early December, about 2 months after the engagement, Jolene Pruitt came over to the house to help me plan the rehearsal dinner. Jolene had been my best friend since we were 13 years old and shared a locker in 8th grade at Harlow Middle School. She was practical and perceptive in a way that could feel uncomfortable if you were trying to avoid the truth, and she loved me with the particular fierceness of someone who had watched me make myself smaller for years and had opinions about it. She sat at the kitchen table while my mother rearranged the centerpiece samples I had put out, swapping my loose wildflower arrangements for structured white lily clusters, explaining the reasoning to no one in particular. Jolene watched. She didn't say a word to my mother, but when I walked her to the door at the end of the evening, she grabbed my arm. I need you to trust me on something, she said. Her voice was low. Don't ask questions yet. Jolene, what does that mean? She squeezed my hand. Not long, just once, firm and certain, the way you press your hand to something to make sure it's solid. Then she walked to her car and drove away. I stood in the doorway watching her taillights disappear, and I felt, not fear exactly, but the particular unease of sensing movement beneath still water. Something was happening that I couldn't see yet. I went back inside. My mother was still at the kitchen table rearranging. It was a Tuesday in late January, roughly 4 months after the engagement, and 4 months before the wedding date we'd set for late May, when my mother invited Declan to lunch. Just the two of them. She called it a chance for us to connect properly, as family. I thought this was a good sign. My mother and Declan had always maintained a careful, surface-level politeness that I had come to think of as the best possible outcome, and if she was reaching towards something warmer, I wanted to believe in it. I was finishing up a reading lesson with my class when he texted me. Back from lunch. Home when you're done. Need to talk. The particular phrasing, not can't wait to see you or heading to the workshop but need to talk, sat in my chest for the rest of the afternoon like a stone. He was at the kitchen table when I got home, hands folded in front of him, the posture of a man who has been thinking carefully about his words for several hours. Your mother told me you had a breakdown during your first year of college, he said. The room shifted. He kept his voice even. Not cold. Declan's voice was never cold, but measured, the way you measure something you need to be precise about. She used the phrase emotionally fragile. She said she worries about your stability. She asked me, he paused. She asked if I was sure I understood what I was taking on. I knew exactly what he was referring to. After my father died in December of my freshman year, I had gone back to school in January and tried to function normally. For about 6 weeks, I nearly managed it. Then one morning in late February, I woke up and could not make myself get out of bed, and I didn't get out of bed properly for almost 2 weeks. I saw a counselor at the University Health Center for the rest of that semester and through the following fall. I worked through it. By my junior year, I was fine. More than fine. I was good. I was whole. I had learned things about grief and resilience and my own interior landscape that I would not trade now. It was not a secret. It was not something I was ashamed of. But it was mine. It had been mine, private, personal, a chapter I'd closed and carried forward without drama. My mother had read from that chapter without my permission, edited it for her purposes, and handed it to the man I was going to marry as evidence. What did you say to her? My voice came out quieter than I intended. Declan looked at me steadily. I said, I don't see a person who's fragile. I see a person who lost her father at 18 and kept going anyway. Something cracked open in my chest. Not pain, something warmer and more complicated than pain, something that felt like being recognized. She left after that, he said. Didn't finish her iced tea. 19 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring twice, then picked up. Declan was disrespectful to me at lunch. Her voice was controlled, quiet, the register she used when she had already decided what the conversation was going to be. He's isolating you from your family, Saoirse. That's what men like him do. He doesn't have a stable income. He restores antiques. What does that mean for your future? Your father had a career, a real one. Dad is gone, Mom. Silence. Then, very softly, very precisely, don't you dare throw that at me. She hung up. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my hand. Declan was watching me from across the room, leaning against the counter. He didn't say anything. He understood, I think, that what I needed in that moment was not words, but the steady, patient fact of his presence. I did not yet know that my mother's lunch with Declan was only the opening move, that she had decided somewhere in the cold logic behind those wet eyes and that ready tissue that the wedding needed to be stopped, that I needed to be stopped, and that if she couldn't stop Declan directly, she would go around him, to his family, to the town, to anyone who would listen. I did not yet know any of that. What I did know, sitting in my kitchen that evening with the winter light fading outside the window, was that something had shifted in my mother, or rather, something that had always been there had moved into the open. And the open was a more dangerous place than anywhere it had been before. There is a particular kind of social geography in a small town that people from cities don't fully understand. In Harlow, North Carolina, population 6,000 and change, information doesn't travel the way it does in larger places where it has to cross distance and fight for attention. In Harlow, it simply appears. You can say something at the counter of the hardware store on Monday morning, and by Tuesday evening, the woman who lives on the other side of town will reference it without realizing she's repeating something she heard third hand. My mother understood this geography better than anyone. 6 weeks before the wedding, on a Thursday in early April, I went into Carol Ann's salon on Main Street for a trim. Carol Ann had been cutting my hair since I was 12 years old. She knew my face as well as she knew her own scissors. She sat me down and leaned close to the mirror, the way she did when she had something to say that she wasn't sure she should say. "Honey, are you doing okay? Your mama stopped in yesterday." I kept my expression still. "What did she say?" Carol Ann hesitated. She was a kind woman and she was picking her words. Just that things at home were complicated, that you were going through something, that Declan might not be, she said he might not be the right fit. I smiled. The particular smile I had perfected over a lifetime of being talked about in rooms I wasn't in. "Everything's fine, Carol Ann. Really?" But it wasn't fine. And I knew by the next morning that it wasn't just Carol Ann. At the grocery store, Norma Hatch at the register looked at me with an expression I had never received from her before. Pure, unfiltered pity. The kind of look you give someone you believe is in trouble but can't help. "Saoirse, sweetheart, if you ever need someone to talk to," I didn't ask what she'd heard. I already understood. Over the following week, I felt it accumulate the way pressure accumulates before a storm. Sideways glances at the post office, a careful gentleness in the voices of the parents at school pickup, people treating me like I was made of something breakable. My mother had moved through this town like a weather system, seeding the same story at every coffee counter and church parking lot. Saoirse is fragile. Declan is a mistake. The wedding shouldn't happen. That Thursday evening, a text from Jolene. "Don't react to anything your mom does this week. I mean it. Trust me." I stared at the screen. "You're scaring me," I typed back. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Good. Scared means you're paying attention. She didn't elaborate. And I, for reasons I could not have fully articulated, some quiet instinct beneath the anxiety, didn't push her to. 5 weeks before the wedding, on a Saturday morning that smelled like coffee and cut grass, Declan's phone rang at 9 o'clock. It was Patricia, his mother. He put it on speaker so I could hear. Not secretly. He looked at me first, waiting, and I nodded. "Declan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know I'm asking because I love you both." Patricia's voice was careful in the way voices get when they're trying not to alarm the person they're speaking to. "Emma called me last night." The name landed in the room the way a cold draft does. You don't see it, but you feel it immediately. "She called around 9. She told me Saoirse has a history of," she used the word episodes. She said Saoirse had to get psychiatric treatment in college and that she has concerns about her stability. A pause. "She cried, Declan. She was very convincing." "Mom." His voice was steady. "Saoirse saw a counselor after her dad died. That's the whole story. Emma is taking one true thing and turning it into something it isn't." "I believe you. I do. I thought you should know what she said." After he hung up, Declan turned to me. There was something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not anger, something quieter and more certain than anger. Clarity. "She's not trying to protect you, Saoirse," he said. "She's trying to own you." I knew he was right. I think I had known for years, not in words, but in the body, in the particular exhaustion of always managing someone else's emotions at the expense of my own. Hearing it said aloud on a Saturday morning with April light coming through the kitchen window made it land differently. It landed like something final. "Don't confront her about it," I told him. "That's exactly what she wants." He nodded, but his jaw was set in the way it got when he was committed to something. That night, he installed a call recording application on his phone. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. He'd learned this from a friend who'd had a contractor dispute several years earlier. In North Carolina, you can legally record any phone call you're a party to without telling the other person. He told me about the app only much later. At the time, I didn't know he had it. 3 nights later, at 11 in the evening, my mother called him. I was almost asleep in the bedroom. I heard his phone ring, heard him get up and close the bedroom door quietly behind him. I heard the low murmur of his voice from the kitchen, but not the words. Later, much later, after the wedding, sitting on our porch steps in the dark, he told me everything. Emma had spoken for almost 9 minutes. She told him about the 2 weeks I couldn't get out of bed. She told him I'd missed finals. She said I had never really recovered, that I managed to seem functional, but that I was underneath, fragile in a way that would eventually become his problem. She told him he seemed like a decent man. She told him to save himself. And at the 3-minute mark, Declan had quietly opened the app on his phone and pressed record. "Is that everything, Emma?" he said when she finally paused. "I'm trying to help you." "Noted," he said. "Good night." He saved the file with the date and time. He did not come back to bed and tell me. He lay down beside me in the dark and stayed awake for a long time, and in the morning, before I was dressed, he drove to Jolene's apartment. He handed her his phone with the recording open. She listened from beginning to end. Her face didn't change. When it finished, she looked at him. "This," she said, "is exactly what I needed." He asked her what she was planning. She turned the phone over in her hand. "Insurance," she said, "the kind Emma Bryant can't cancel." And the Monday 7 days before the wedding, I was sitting at my desk during my lunch break, grading a set of math worksheets when I decided to call the florist. A routine confirmation. Nothing more. The phone rang twice. "Sandy's Garden Studio, this is Sandy." "Hi, Sandy. This is Saoirse Bryant. I'm just calling to confirm our order for next Saturday." A pause. The kind of pause that is too long to mean nothing. "Miss Bryant, that order was canceled 4 days ago." The pencil in my hand stopped moving. "I'm sorry?" "The woman who called said she was you. She said the wedding had been called off." I hung up. My fingers were already dialing the catering company. "Yes, Miss Bryant, we received the cancellation last Thursday. The woman identified herself as the bride." I hung up. I called the venue. "I am sorry, Miss Bryant, we got the call 6 days ago. She said the family had made a decision." And I sat at my desk in an empty classroom. My students were at recess, 22 8-year-olds who had no idea that their teacher was watching the ground dissolve beneath her. And I stared at the phone in my hand. My mother had not just tried to stop the wedding. She had reached into every contract, every vendor agreement, every carefully saved dollar, and with a series of phone calls in which she spoke my name and pretended to be me, she had taken it all apart. I called her. She picked up on the first ring, as if she had been sitting beside the phone. "Mom, you canceled my wedding." "I canceled a mistake. That was not your decision to make." Her voice, when it came back, was calm in a way I had heard before. Not the calm of peace, but the calm of absolute certainty. The calm of someone who has decided they are right. "Everything about you is my decision, Saoirse. I raised you. I fed you. I sat in that funeral home and planned your father's burial while you were at school 300 miles away. I did that alone. This wedding, everything about your life, belongs to me. It is mine to give or to take back. Something that had been sleeping inside me for a very long time. Something that had gone quiet the day my mother pressed my hand at the airport security line and said, 'It's just us now,' opened its eyes. 'No,' I said, 'just that, just the one word. It isn't.' And I ended the call. My hands were shaking. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, I could hear my students at recess. The particular bright noise of children who don't yet know that the world is capable of this. My voice had been steady when I said no. That surprised me more than anything my mother had just told me. I don't remember the drive home. I remember the kitchen floor, the cold of the tile through my dress, the way the afternoon light made a slow rectangle on the wall, the sound of the refrigerator humming. I was sitting with my back against the dishwasher, my bag still on my shoulder, when Declan came in from the workshop. He had sawdust on his forearms. He looked at me and didn't say anything immediately, just came and sat down beside me on the floor, close enough that our shoulders touched. We sat like that for a while. 10 minutes maybe, 15. "She canceled everything," I said finally. "Every single vendor. She pretended to be me, 7 days out." His hand found mine. His palm was rough and warm. "Then we figure it out," he said. "There's no money for replacements. There's no time. Saoirse." His voice was quiet but absolute. I said, "We figure it out." He pulled out his phone and called Jolene. She picked up on the second ring. He gave her the short version. All vendors canceled, Emma responsible, 7 days remaining. There was a brief silence on her end. Not the silence of shock. I heard it and knew the difference. It was the silence of someone shifting into a different mode. "Don't call any of the vendors," Jolene said. "Don't call your mother. Give me 48 hours. Declan looked at me. I nodded. 48 hours, he said. "Trust me," she said, and the line went quiet. 5 days before the wedding. A Wednesday afternoon in mid-May, the kind of day that can't decide if it's still spring or already summer. Warm enough that the windows were open, cool enough that you still wanted a blanket on the couch. Jolene arrived at our front door carrying a manila folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Declan had proposed, where I'd learned about the cancellations, where every conversation that mattered this year had somehow found its way. She set the folder in front of her and placed both hands flat on top of it. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything." I nodded. Declan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. "The week your mother volunteered to take over the vendor calls, 7 months ago, I started making a backup plan." The room went still. 7 months? I said. I had promised not to interrupt, and I broke the promise in 4 seconds. Jolene looked at me evenly. "Do you remember your college graduation?" I did. Of course I did. It was one of those memories with sharp edges, the kind you can't smooth down no matter how much time passes. My mother had arrived 43 minutes late, missing the actual ceremony. She had walked into the reception afterward already in the middle of an argument with the parents of my college roommate over a parking space in the campus lot. She had spent the next 2 hours telling every adult within earshot that an education degree was, in her words, a kind way of saying you couldn't decide what to do with your potential. She said this to people she had never met. She said it more than once. I had cried in the bathroom of the reception hall. Jolene had stood outside the stall door with her hand flat against the wood, not saying anything, just being there. "I made a decision that afternoon," Jolene said. "Standing outside that bathroom, I told myself I would never let her do that to you again. Not at anything that mattered, not at the big ones." She opened the folder. The first document she placed on the table was a contract. 2 pages, signed and dated 7 months ago. Cedarwood Hollow, Private Garden Estate, 318 Hutchins Lane, Harlow, North Carolina. Owner, Dale Hutchins. Occupation, retired landscape architect. Connection to Jolene. They had served together on the committee for the Harlow Community Garden restoration 3 years earlier. Dale was 64 years old, soft-spoken, and had a property that had been in his family for 2 generations. 11 acres of managed land with a rolling lawn, 2 ancient white oak trees, a natural wildflower border along the fence line, and a storage barn full of wooden garden furniture he'd built himself over 30 years of weekends. The deposit on the contract was $1,500, Jolene's own money. "You spent your own money," I said. My voice came out strange, thin. 7 months ago, she said. Before I even knew for certain she'd do something like this, I just knew she might. "Jolene, if the wedding had gone normally, if Mom hadn't done any of this, you would have lost that money." "I know." "That's $1,500. "I can count, Saoirse." She said it without sharpness, just factually. The way she'd always talked to me when she thought I was missing the point. "You would have done the same for me," she said, and she moved on before I could argue because she knew me well enough to know I would argue, and she didn't have time for it. She turned to the next page. Florist, Sandy's Garden Studio, Millbrook, North Carolina. A studio in the town 20 minutes east of Harlow. Sandy Briggs had been running it for 11 years. Jolene had driven out to meet her in person 4 months ago. The order? Black-eyed Susans, lavender, baby's breath, loose stems, wildflower arrangements. Exactly what I had originally chosen. Exactly what my mother had replaced with white lilies without asking me. Deposit paid in full. Jolene's money. "How did you know what I wanted?" I asked. "Because you told me what you wanted the week after you got engaged," she said. "Before your mother got involved, I wrote it down." I pressed my hand over my mouth. Declan made a sound, not quite a laugh, more like the sharp exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for a long time and finally let it go. Jolene continued. Catering. Big Ray Fontenot and his crew. Ray Fontenot was 58 years old and ran a barbecue operation out of a converted trailer that he took to county fairs, private events, and the occasional church fundraiser. He was not a restaurant. He was a man with a smoker the size of a small car and a 40-year-old family recipe for brisket that people drove an hour to eat. Dale Hutchins had known Ray since they were in high school together. When Jolene explained the situation to Dale, Dale called Ray the same afternoon. Ray had agreed to cater the backup wedding at cost. Not because he was owed a favor, because he liked the idea of it. Pulled pork, brisket, cornbread, coleslaw, sweet tea in mason jars. The meal I had wanted from the beginning. The meal my mother had replaced with the seafood buffet because she was worried about what people would think. Ray's bringing his full setup, Jolene said. Smoker, tables, the whole thing. He'll start at noon. Declan looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at Jolene. I don't know what to say to you. Then don't say anything, she told him. Let me finish. Photography? Candace Odom. Candace was a friend of Jolene's from their first year of college. They'd been in the same dormitory floor and had stayed close. She worked during the week as a graphic designer and shot weddings on weekends. She was not a luxury photographer. She was precise, warm, and had an instinct for the kind of quiet moments that formal photographers sometimes missed. The grandmother's face during the first dance, the groom's hands shaking slightly when he reached for the ring. Jolene had contacted her 3 months ago, and she had blocked the date immediately. Her fee was a fraction of what the original photographer had quoted. She had insisted on a discount when Jolene explained why. Music. Pete Dunbar. Pete was 41, a furniture maker by trade and a guitarist by long practice, the kind of player who performed not because he needed an audience, but because the music didn't work if it stayed inside him. He and Declan had met through the Harlow Woodworking Guild 4 years ago and had been quiet friends since. The kind of friendship built on shared craft and not many words. He played finger-picking arrangements of old American songs, the kind of music that sounded like it had been growing somewhere for 100 years. Jolene had called him the same week she booked the venue. He had said yes in under 30 seconds. Total cost for the backup plan, Jolene said, setting down a single handwritten sheet with figures, is approximately $5,200. I have covered $3,800 of it across the past 7 months. The remaining $1,400 covers Ray's supply costs and Candace's travel. Jolene. My voice broke on her name. You pay me back when you can. No timeline, no interest. It is not negotiable, she said. Move on. She pulled out another sheet. The guest list. All 187 names, phone numbers, and email addresses maintained in a separate document from the moment I had shared the original list with her, before my mother had taken over the communications. The morning of the wedding, Jolene said, I send a mass text. Venue has been upgraded. Surprise for the bride and groom. New address is Cedarwood Hollow, 318 Hutchins Lane. Arrive by 3 p.m. I frame it as a last-minute beautiful surprise, which it is. I also make personal calls to the 20 most important guests, your family, Declan's family, the people who need to hear a voice, not just a text. And she looked at me steadily. Your mother receives the original venue address, only the original address. As far as she knows, the wedding is still at the Harlow Community Pavilion. The room was very quiet. There is one more thing, Jolene said. Her voice shifted slightly, careful the way it got when she was about to say something she'd been thinking through for a long time. I've been in contact with Gwen Tasker at WKBL-TV. I pitched her a story, local interest, feel-good segment, best friend saves wedding, community comes together. She's interested. I felt the shift that a camera represents, the way it makes something permanent. She doesn't know the details about your mother, Jolene said quickly. She just knows it's a story about friendship and community. That's all she needs to know right now. You don't have to decide about the rest tonight. She paused. But Saoirse, your mother put this on Facebook. She made it public. She told 900 people a story about you that isn't true. All I'm asking is whether you want the true story to exist somewhere. I sat with that for a long moment. The part of me that had been taught since childhood to keep the peace said, don't. Keep it private. Protect her. The part of me that had said no into a phone in an empty classroom 5 days ago said something different. Set it up, I said. Jolene nodded once, closed the folder. Declan crossed the room and sat down next to me at the table. He didn't put his arm around me or say anything reassuring. He just sat beside me, present and steady, the way he always was. I didn't do this because I hate your mother, Jolene said. She was looking at the folder now, not at me. I want to be clear about that. I did it because I love you, and because I made a promise in a bathroom at your college graduation that I intended to keep. I had no words. I have tried, since then, to find the right ones. The right way to describe what it feels like to discover that someone has been quietly building a safety net beneath you for 7 months without your knowledge, spending their own money, making their own calls, asking nothing in return. I have not found the words yet. I'm not sure they exist. What I had instead of words was tears. The first ones in months that weren't about loss. 4 days before the wedding. Thursday. I was standing in the hallway outside my classroom during the transition between lunch and afternoon lessons, refilling my water bottle at the fountain near the main corridor when I heard her voice. Not on the phone. In person. In my building. I'm here to see my daughter. The voice was carrying. Not shouting, but projected with the particular skill of someone who has always understood that volume is optional when clarity of purpose is enough. She's been going through a difficult time. I'm concerned about her well-being. I looked up. My mother was standing at the front desk speaking to Sandra, our receptionist. The hallway was not empty. Mrs. Patton from the 4th grade classroom had her door open, and I could see her head turn. Coach Webb, who had been walking toward the supply closet with a stack of folders, stopped walking. 2 parents who were waiting for a pickup conference looked up from their phones. The blood left my face. I felt it happen. A physical draining, like pressure releasing from somewhere. I walked toward her. My sneakers made their usual sound on the linoleum. I kept my pace even. I did not run. Mom, I reached her at the front desk. This is my workplace. I need you to leave. She turned. Her expression arranged itself into something wounded. Chin just slightly unsteady, eyes carrying that particular controlled shine that I had watched work on other people for my entire life. I'm trying to help you, sweetheart. People are worried. Ma'am. Sandra's voice was quiet, but had iron in it. I'm going to need to ask you to step outside. My mother looked around the hallway. At the open classroom doors, at the parents who had stopped pretending to look at their phones, at Coach Webb standing motionless near the supply room. And she took a breath. You'll all see, she said, not to me specifically, to the air, to the building, to whoever was listening. You'll understand eventually. She walked to the exit. The door swung shut behind her. The hallway slowly remembered how to breathe. Coach Webb resumed walking. Mrs. Patton stepped back from her doorway. Sandra glanced at me with an expression that was equal parts apology and sympathy. Then a hand touched my elbow. Coach Ardell Webb. 61 years old, 28 years at Harlow Elementary, reading glasses on a beaded chain around his neck. He had coached every sport the school offered at some point in his career. He was not a man who spoke often or without purpose. He leaned close. His voice was low enough that only I could hear it. My mother was the same way, he said. Don't let her win. 5 words. I have thought about those 5 words many times since then. About how little it takes sometimes to hold a person together. 5 words from a man I had worked beside for 3 years without ever having a conversation that went beyond weather and staff meeting schedules. They held me up for the rest of that day, and the day after, 2 days before the wedding, Thursday evening. The rehearsal dinner was at Patricia Mercer's house, a small ranch-style home on the east side of Harlow with a wraparound porch and flower boxes that Patricia tended with a seriousness that some people bring to careers. Declan had strung lights along the porch railing the previous summer, and they were still there, warm and slightly uneven in the way that handmade things always are. About 25 people. Declan's family, Patricia, his cousins Bobby and Anna, his Aunt Margaret, who had flown in from Oregon that afternoon, elderly Mrs. Paulson from next door who had been feeding Declan dinner every Sunday since his father left when Declan was 9. My Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother, retired Navy, a man of very few words and very firm opinions who had driven 4 hours from his home in Virginia because I had asked him to walk me down the aisle, and who had said yes before I finished the sentence. Jolene, a handful of close friends. The mood was warm and slightly electric. The particular combination of nerves and joy that lives in the 24 hours before something large and permanent. My mother was not invited. She came anyway. I heard a car door at 7:15. I knew the sound of her engine, a silver sedan she kept immaculate because, as she had always said, appearances were the first thing people used to judge you. I heard the footsteps on the porch steps, and I set down my glass. Patricia opened the door before my mother could knock. Emma, Patricia's voice was careful. We weren't expecting... I'm the mother of the bride. My mother stepped inside. The living room went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something enters that doesn't belong there. Not loudly, but completely, like a sound being cut off. Frank straightened in his chair by the window. Bobby set his fork down. My mother crossed to the side table where the drinks were, poured herself a glass from a bottle she had brought, her own bottle carried in under her arm, and turned to face the room. She raised her glass. I'd just like to say, she began in the tone of someone who has rehearsed this, that I hope this marriage lasts longer than her ability to commit to things she says she wants. The silence that followed had weight. Patricia stood up. She was not a tall woman, and she was not a loud woman, but she had raised a son alone and run a household on a teacher's salary, and she had, over 61 years, developed a particular quality of stillness that was more authoritative than volume. "Emma," she said, "that is enough." My mother set her glass down on the side table with a small, deliberate click. "I've said what needed saying," she told the room. She walked out. The screen door closed behind her with a sharp, clean sound. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Declan's hand found mine under the table. He pressed it once, firmly. I pressed back. Patricia came across the room. She didn't sit down across from me or stand above me. She crouched beside my chair so that we were at eye level, and she took both of my hands in hers. Her eyes were wet. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "There was a moment, early on, when I let someone put doubt in my mind. I should have known better. I should have known you." She squeezed my hands. "You are welcome in this family, Saoirse. You have always been welcome. I just wasn't saying it loudly enough." One day before the wedding, Friday, Jolene had insisted I stay at her apartment the night before the wedding, not as tradition, as logistics. She knew my mother well enough to know that a night without access was a night without interference. We were sitting on her couch around 8 in the evening, eating takeout from the Thai place on Ferris Street, when my phone buzzed. A screenshot from my colleague, Jenny Albright, with no message attached, just the image. My mother's Facebook page, public post, timestamp, 40 minutes earlier. "Please keep my daughter in your prayers. She is rushing into a marriage against the advice of her doctors. I have done everything a mother can do. My heart is broken for what is coming." Against the advice of her doctors. I read it 3 times. Each time, the words rearranged themselves into something uglier. There was no doctor. There was no medical advice. My mother had fabricated a clinical concern and posted it to 900 people in a town where everyone knew everyone's children's names. My hands were shaking. Jolene looked over at the screen. "Read it." Her expression didn't change. She was past shock into the operational calm she moved into when things needed to be handled. "I saw it 22 minutes ago," she said. "She told 900 people I'm marrying against medical advice, Jolene. There is no medical advice. There is no doctor who said, 'I know.'" She took the phone from my hand, not roughly, gently, the way you take something from someone that is hurting them. "Don't respond. Tomorrow, the truth speaks for itself." Declan called. He had seen it. He offered to come over. "Stay home," I told him. "I'm okay. I'm with Jolene." A pause. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "No more screens tonight," he said. "Agreed." Jolene put my phone in the kitchen drawer. She made chamomile tea from a box she kept specifically for bad nights. We sat on the couch and watched half a movie we'd both already seen and didn't talk much, and it was exactly the right thing. I lay in Jolene's guest room that night and looked at the ceiling fan turning slow circles in the dark, and I waited for the fear to come, the dread, the particular anxiety that had been my companion for the better part of a year. It didn't come. What came instead was something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Quiet. Not the quiet of defeat. The quiet of someone who has finally decided, all the way down, in the places that count, that she is done waiting for permission. Tomorrow would be different. I knew it the way you know things that are already true. Saturday. The last Saturday in May, 6 in the morning. I woke to the sound of Jolene already on the phone in the living room. She was pacing. I could hear the soft rhythm of her footsteps through the wall. And she was speaking in a voice that was clear and unhurried and completely in command. "Good morning. This is Jolene Pruitt calling on behalf of the bride. I'm reaching out because the wedding location has been upgraded as a surprise for the couple. The new address is Cedarwood Hollow, 318 Hutchins Lane. Please arrive by 3 p.m. and please don't go to the original address. We want the surprise to land right." I got up and stood in the doorway of the living room. She was in sweatpants and a flannel shirt, her hair pulled back, a printed spreadsheet in one hand and her phone in the other. The spreadsheet had all 187 names on it. Each name was highlighted. Yellow for mass text sent, green for confirmed, red for needs a personal call. She saw me in the doorway and pointed at the coffee maker. Already full. Already hot. I poured a cup and sat at her kitchen table and watched her work. By 8 a.m., she had made 20 personal calls. Patricia Mercer, confirmed, voice warm and already emotional. Frank, confirmed, gruff, and I could hear through Jolene's end of the call that his voice was doing the thing it did when he was trying not to show something. Bobby, Aunt Margaret, Jenny Albright, Coach Webb, confirmed, confirmed, confirmed. By 10 a.m., 182 of 187 guests had confirmed the new location. 5 had not responded yet, and Jolene had flagged them red. Of those 5, 3 eventually confirmed by noon. 1 family had a sick child and couldn't attend. 1 couple was stuck in travel delays and sent a message full of apologies and love. No one on the list received no word at all. Jolene had built the list carefully and maintained it for 7 months. It was airtight, almost. There was 1 person who was not on the list at all. Emma Bryant had no entry in Jolene's spreadsheet. No text was sent to her number. No call was made. As far as she knew, the wedding was happening at the Harlow Community Pavilion, the venue she had canceled, the contract she had terminated by pretending to be me, the empty hall. Gwen Tasker from WKBL-TV arrived at Cedarwood Hollow at 11:30 to set up. She came with 1 cameraman, a professional and unobtrusive presence. Jolene had briefed her on the shape of the story: community love, friendship, a wedding that almost didn't happen and did anyway. Gwen was experienced enough to know when to stay out of the frame and when to move toward it. At noon, I put on my dress in Jolene's bedroom. It was simple: ivory, tea-length, with lace at the sleeves and a neckline that didn't demand attention. I had bought it at a consignment shop in Asheville 8 months ago, the second dress I had tried on, and I had known immediately. It had cost $75. My mother had called it secondhand embarrassment. I called it mine. Frank arrived at 1:30. He was wearing a gray suit that fit him the way suits fit men who have worn uniforms for 20 years, precisely, without fuss. His shoes were polished. His eyes were already red. He stopped in the doorway when he saw me. He stood there for a moment without speaking. Then he cleared his throat. "Lord, Saoirse." His voice was rough at the edges. "You look like your daddy on his wedding day." I laughed. A real one, sudden, the kind that surprises you. "Stubborn and beautiful," he added. "Both of those are compliments." Jolene checked her watch, checked her list, looked at me. "Ready?" I smoothed the front of my dress. I took 1 breath. "I've been ready for 27 years, I said. Hollow sat at the end of a gravel lane lined with pecan trees, their new May leaves casting a shifting green light across the drive. There was a white wooden gate, open wide, and beyond it a rolling lawn bordered by a split-rail fence. Along the fence line, black-eyed Susans and lavender and baby's breath grew in loose, unruly drifts. Exactly the kind of flowers I had first imagined, before white lilies replaced them on a florist's order form I never signed. 2 ancient white oak trees stood at the center of the lawn. Jolene had strung fairy lights between them. Hundreds of small, warm lights that weren't yet visible in the afternoon brightness, but would begin to matter as the sun moved. Between the oaks, a center aisle ran between 2 sections of chairs. The chairs were wooden, 60 of them that Dale had built himself over 30 years of weekend projects, each one slightly different from the last. Each one worn smooth by time and use and weather. They had been arranged with a care that made their differences feel intentional rather than mismatched. The remaining guests would stand at the edges and along the fence, which created something that felt less like a ceremony and more like a gathering. Behind the seating, near the barn, Big Ray Fontenot had his smoker going. The smell of it, wood and brisket and something sweeter underneath, had reached the gate before we did. Ray was in his denim apron, unhurried and cheerful, moving around his equipment with the ease of a man who has done this exact thing in every conceivable setting and has long since stopped being anxious about any of it. Guests had begun arriving at 2:30. They came up the gravel lane and through the white gate, and almost every one of them stopped. Not paused. Stopped. Stood still. Looked. Some pressed their hands to their chests. Some laughed in the unguarded way that people laugh when something is more beautiful than they were prepared for. Mrs. Paulson, 80 years old, Sunday hat and all, found me near the barn and took both of my hands in her dry, papery ones. "Your father is watching this," she said. It was not a question. "I know," I said, and I did. Patricia arrived with Bobby and Aunt Margaret and found me by the oak trees. She wrapped both arms around me without speaking, the way you hold on to something you almost lost, and then stepped back and looked at my face. "Perfect," she said, simply. This is exactly what it was supposed to look like. Gwen Tasker and her cameraman were set up near the barn, off to one side, quiet as furniture. They were not intrusive. They were simply there, recording what was happening, and what was happening was real. At 2:55, Jolene found me at the edge of the lawn and stood beside me for a moment, looking out at the 184 people settling into their places. On the wooden chairs, along the fence line, beneath the oaks. "She'll have found out by now," Jolene said quietly, "that the pavilion is empty." I nodded. "Do you want to know what happens there?" "Not today," I said. "Tell me later." Jolene nodded. She handed me my bouquet. Black-eyed Susans in lavender and baby's breath, loose and unstructured, held together with a piece of twine. Exactly what I had asked for. Exactly what had been taken. Exactly what had been given back. 3 o'clock. The light in late May in North Carolina at 3 in the afternoon is a particular shade of gold. Not the sharp brightness of midday, but something warmer and more horizontal. The kind of light that makes everything it touches look like it's been kept somewhere safe. Frank took my arm at the edge of the aisle. His grip was firm. Military firm, the grip of a man who had spent 20 years holding things steady, but his hand was trembling slightly. He felt it, and I felt it, and neither of us mentioned it. "Slow steps," he said quietly. "Make it count." Pete Dunbar was seated on a wooden stool under the left oak, a guitar across his lap. He began playing as Frank and I moved forward, a finger-picking arrangement, unhurried and precise, of the song that had been playing on a small Bluetooth speaker in Declan's workshop the first night I had stayed there, 2 years before, when we had danced badly and laughed about it, and something between us had settled into place. 184 faces turned. Some were already crying. Patricia had her handkerchief pressed to the corner of her eye. Coach Webb, seated in the 4th row, gave me a single nod. Small, firm, the nod of someone keeping a promise. Bobby was grinning the way men grin when they are trying very hard not to cry, and have decided grinning is a reasonable alternative. Declan was at the end of the aisle. He was wearing a dark jacket over a white shirt, no tie, and he had made no attempt whatsoever to hide that he had been crying already. His eyes were red and his hands were clasped in front of him, and he was watching me come toward him with an expression that I will carry for the rest of my life. Not relief, not joy exactly, something deeper than both, the particular look of a person who has decided on something and is watching the decision arrive. Frank delivered me to him, shook his hand, said, "You take care of her, or you answer to me." Declan said, "Yes, sir," without hesitation. David Okafor, Declan's college roommate, ordained online specifically for this afternoon, had known both of us long enough to keep the ceremony short and true. 2 readings, no sermon, and then the vows. Declan went first. He had written his on a folded piece of paper that he held in both hands, and his voice broke precisely once, at the word home. He didn't apologize for it. He just let it happen and continued. My turn. I didn't have paper. I hadn't been able to write it down because every time I tried, the words came out either too large or too small, and I had finally decided that the only version that would be right was the one that came in the moment, looking at him with no distance between what I felt and what I said. "I choose you," I said, "not because I need someone to rescue me, but because I have finally understood that I deserve to be loved without conditions attached. I don't need anyone's permission to be happy, not anymore, not ever again." The lawn went quiet. Even the wind, for a moment, seemed to hold. David pronounced us married. We kissed under the white oaks, and the fairy lights swayed once, gently, in a breath of afternoon air, and 184 people rose to their feet. The sound of their applause moved through Cedarwood Hollow like a wave, and somewhere 12 minutes away in the parking lot of the Harlow Community Pavilion, the afternoon was very quiet and there was no one there at all. I wasn't there. I want to be clear about that. While what I'm about to describe was happening 12 minutes away, I was standing under the white oak trees at Cedarwood Hollow with my husband's hand in mine, listening to Big Ray's smoker and Pete Dunbar's guitar, and the sound of 184 people talking and laughing in the golden late afternoon light. I learned the details afterward, from Frank, who heard some of it, from Gwen Tasker, whose cameraman had footage of the gate, from Theo Aldridge, who was there for all of it and told me the story 3 days later, sitting at our kitchen table with a cup of coffee, speaking carefully and without embellishment. I have put it together the best I can. My mother arrived at the Harlow Community Pavilion at approximately 2:45 in the afternoon. She was driving her silver sedan, the one she kept spotlessly clean because she had always believed that how you maintained your possessions reflected how seriously you took yourself. She parked in the lot, which was empty except for her car. She got out. She was wearing a navy dress with a fitted waist and pearl earrings she saved for occasions she considered significant. She had done her hair. She was carrying her good purse. This was not the outfit of a woman who expected to grieve. This was the outfit of a woman who expected to witness something. She walked toward the pavilion entrance and stopped. No tent. No chairs arranged in rows. No florist van unloading arrangements. No catering setup. No tables. No tablecloths. No photographer checking her equipment. No musician tuning up. No arriving guests looking for parking. No ushers with programs. Nothing. A building. A parking lot. Afternoon light. Silence. She stood there for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. She called me first. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. Jolene had my phone in her jacket pocket and had been screening calls since noon. She called Jolene. Voicemail. She called Patricia. Voicemail. Patricia was seated in the front row at Cedarwood Hollow, dabbing her eyes with her handkerchief, watching her son get married. She called Bobby. Voicemail. She called Jenny Albright, who had been instructed by Jolene and had her volume turned off. She called Frank, who saw her name on the screen and put the phone face down on the wooden chair beside him without answering. 7 calls. 8. 9. Not one answer. Theo told me later that he had heard about this part secondhand and tried to imagine it. My mother standing in the center of an empty parking lot, turning in a slow circle, holding the phone to her ear, the line ringing and ringing into silence. The sun was warm. The cicadas were loud. There were no other sounds. She had come to watch me fail. Instead, she was standing alone in a parking lot, calling numbers that no one was picking up, in a town where everyone she knew was 12 minutes away watching my wedding. Then someone answered. Rosalind Marsh, a distant relative of Declan's by marriage, 72 years old, slightly hard of hearing, who lived on the far edge of the county and had received the mass text that morning, but had not read it carefully, and who had not been on the personal call list because Jolene had assessed her as a low-priority confirm, given her distance and age, and had not anticipated that she would become, entirely by accident, the one thread that unraveled the plan. Rosalind picked up on the 6th ring. "Oh, Emma, didn't you get the message, honey? They moved it. Some kind of surprise for the kids. It's out on Hutchins Lane now. Cedarwood something. Real pretty place, I hear." My mother hung up without responding. 23 minutes later, Theo had checked his watch when he heard the crunch of tires on the gravel. A silver sedan came up the lane at Cedarwood Hollow. It stopped just past the pecan trees. The door opened. My mother got out. Through the white wooden gate, she could see everything. The fairy lights beginning to matter as the sun moved lower. The loose wildflower arrangements, black-eyed Susans and lavender, the flowers she had replaced with white lilies, on every table and along every wooden chair. The mason jars of sweet tea catching the light. The smoke from Big Ray's setup drifting sweet and low over the lawn. The sound of voices and laughter and Pete Dunbar playing something soft and unhurried on his guitar. And further in, near the oak trees, Declan and me. We were dancing by then, badly and happily, while Bobby tried to teach his Aunt Margaret a two-step and Patricia watched with her handkerchief still in her hand, and Frank stood near the barn with a plate of brisket and an expression of deep, private satisfaction. Everything my mother had dismantled was right there, whole, lit up, alive, and there was a gate between her and it. Theo Aldridge was standing at that gate. He was 34 years old, calm-faced, and had known Declan since they were in the same woodworking guild together. Jolene had called him 3 days before the wedding, explained the situation with the precision of a woman who had been planning for 7 months, and asked if he would stand at the entrance with a clipboard and a specific task. He had said yes, without asking how long it would take. He was holding the clipboard now, and he had a list on it, and my mother's name was not on the list. "Good afternoon," Theo said. "Can I get your name?" My mother looked at him. "I'm the mother of the bride." Theo looked down at the clipboard. He ran his finger along the list slowly, top to bottom. He looked up. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm not finding your name here. There must be a mistake. I've checked twice. I don't see it." She looked past him through the gate. She could see the chairs, the flowers, the mason jars, the guests. She could see the back of my ivory dress. She could see Declan's arm around my waist. She could see Frank laughing at something Bobby had said, and Patricia talking with Aunt Margaret, and Mrs. Paulson seated near the oak trees in her Sunday hat, with a plate balanced on her knee. Everything she had spent 7 months trying to prevent was happening 30 yards away from where she stood. "I gave birth to her," my mother said. Her voice had changed, the controlled quality beginning to fray at the edges, something rawer showing through underneath. "I am her mother. I have the right to be at my daughter's wedding." "I understand, ma'am," Theo said, But I'm not able to let anyone through who isn't on the list. Those are my instructions." Her voice rose, not to shouting, but to the register it reached when she was no longer performing and had moved into something real. "This is my daughter's wedding. I arranged half of it. I know every vendor on that property. The vendors on this property were arranged by the maid of honor," Theo said, gently, factually. Several guests near the gate had turned their heads. Bobby's wife leaned toward him and said something quiet. Frank, who had a direct sightline to the gate from where he stood, went still. My mother saw the faces looking at her, and then something shifted in her expression. A new kind of awareness moving in, the awareness of being seen. Not seen as she intended to be seen, but seen plainly, without the frame she had always built around herself. The devoted mother, the sacrificing widow, the woman who only ever wanted what was best. Those faces were not looking at that woman. They were looking at someone standing outside a gate where her name was not on the list, at her daughter's wedding. In a town where everyone had read the Facebook post about medical advice, and everyone had heard from someone who had heard from someone else what had happened to the vendors. They knew, not from Jolene, not from me, from the simple arithmetic of absence and presence. The mother of the bride was at the gate and not inside. The wedding had moved locations at the last minute due to, as the mass text had said, unforeseen cancellations by a family member. There was only one family member who mattered in this story. Harlow had always been good at arithmetic. Then my mother saw the camera. Gwen Tasker's cameraman had moved toward the gate. Not aggressively, not intrusively, simply following the story the way cameras follow movement. The red recording light was on. Small and steady and unmistakable. My mother looked directly into the lens. 1 second, 2, 3. I have watched the footage once, 2 weeks after the wedding, sitting on our couch in the early evening with Declan beside me. I watched it once and have not watched it again. What I saw in those 3 seconds was not rage and not grief and not the wounded performance I had watched my whole life. It was something I had never seen on my mother's face before. Exposure. The mask didn't fall off. It cracked, just enough to show what was underneath. Not a monster, not a villain, just a frightened woman who had bet everything on control and was standing in a gravel driveway watching it fail. She turned around, walked back to her car, her heels pressed into the gravel with each step. She did not look back at the gate or the lights or the people or the camera or the daughter she could not reach. The car door closed. The engine started. The silver sedan moved back down the lane between the pecan trees and was gone. Inside the garden, Jolene was standing near the dessert table. She had a clear sightline to the gate and had been watching. She saw the sedan disappear around the bend. She picked up her mason jar of sweet tea, took a sip, and walked back to the dance floor. She found me near the oak trees and touched my arm. "She came," she said quietly, close to my ear so only I could hear. "She left. You didn't miss anything." That was all she said about it that evening. I didn't ask for more. I was dancing. I want to tell you about the rest of that evening because I think it matters, not the drama of the gate. The other part. The ordinary part. The part that was just a wedding. Paper plates loaded with brisket and pulled pork and cornbread and coleslaw. Big Ray moving through the crowd, refilling mason jars of sweet tea with the unhurried generosity of a man who feeds people as an act of love. Declan's cousin Bobby attempting to teach anyone who would stand still long enough to learn the basic footwork of a two-step, with results that were enthusiastic and occasionally dangerous. Mrs. Paulson found a chair near the oak trees and stayed in it for the entire evening, watching everything with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to know that ordinary moments are the ones worth saving. We cut the cake. 2 tiers, buttercream frosting, decorated with a small cluster of wildflowers that Jolene had added that morning. The topper was 2 small carved wooden figures, roughly made, clearly handmade. Declan had carved them from a piece of walnut scrap 3 weeks before the wedding. He had left the wood shavings on the workbench, and I had noticed them and said nothing because I understood that some things are better received than anticipated. Patricia stood up to speak. She was not, as she said herself, a woman who sought out the microphone. The garden went quiet when she cleared her throat, because the people who knew her understood that when she chose to speak publicly, it meant something. "I'm not going to make a long speech," she said. "I just want to say one thing." She looked at me across the table. "Welcome to this family, Saoirse. For real this time. All the way." Some people laughed, some people cried. I did both simultaneously, which is apparently a thing a person can do. Frank went next. He stood up slowly, the way men of a certain age and military bearing stand up. deliberately without rush. He held his mason jar in one hand. His voice, when it came, had the particular roughness of a man keeping strong feelings on a short leash. "My brother always said his girl would find her way," he said. He stopped, swallowed once. He was right. He sat down. The applause was warm and sustained and sounded in the early evening air under the oak trees, with the fairy lights finally doing what they were made for, like something that had been saved up for a long time. I sat at one of Dale's long wooden tables and looked around at 184 people eating barbecue in a garden full of wildflowers in a small North Carolina town, and I noticed something. Nobody was performing. Not one person at that wedding was managing an impression or monitoring an effect or angling toward the right kind of memory. People were just there, present, full, unguarded, laughing without checking if the laugh was appropriate, crying without apologizing for it, eating with both hands and going back for seconds. For the first time in my life, a celebration was not being held hostage by someone else's need to control its meaning. Jolene caught my eye from across the table. She raised her mason jar. I raised mine. We didn't say anything. After 7 months of plans and backup plans and phone calls and spreadsheets and $1,500 and $3,800 more dollars and a folder thick enough to prop open a window. After all of that, we were sitting in a wildflower garden on a warm May evening, and the thing she had built had held, and neither of us needed words to say what that meant. Late that same night, after the last guest had gone, after Dale had helped us stack the chairs and Ray had packed up his smoker and Pete Dunbar had put his guitar in its case and driven home, Declan and I sat on the porch steps of our house. My shoes were off. His jacket was draped over the railing. The night air smelled like jasmine from the neighbor's yard and faint wood smoke that had followed us home from Cedarwood Hollow in our clothes. "There's something I need you to hear," Declan said. He took out his phone, opened the audio files, found the one dated 6 days ago, 11 p.m. "I didn't play this for you before," he said. "You were already caring too much. I didn't want to add to it, but you should hear it now." He pressed play. My mother's voice came through the speaker into the warm dark of our porch. "She'll fall apart under pressure. She always has." I watched it happen. "She couldn't get out of bed for 2 weeks, Declan. 2 weeks. I had to fly up and bring her home like a child. I listened without moving. You seem like a decent man, a good man. Don't let her drag you down. Walk away now while you still can. Save yourself." The recording ended. The cicadas filled in behind it. I sat with it for a while. With the voice that had sung me to sleep when I was small, that had read to me, that had held me at my father's funeral and said, "It's just us now." The voice that had also, for as long as I could remember, told me in ways large and small that I was too fragile, too damaged, too much, not enough, that I required managing and protecting and containing. "I'm not broken," I said, to the dark, to myself, to the years the voice had spent trying to convince me otherwise. I never was. Declan didn't argue. He waited. "I want to send this to Gwen Tasker," I said. He looked at me. "Are you sure?" My mother went on Facebook and told 900 people I was marrying against medical advice. She told this town a story about me. This is just the true one. I folded my hands in my lap. "And the vendor cancellations," I said. "The emails where she signed my name. The voicemails where she pretended to be me. Jolene has all of those documented." He nodded slowly. "I'm not doing this to hurt her," I said. I needed to say it out loud because I needed to hear myself say it and know whether it was true. It was true. "I'm doing this so she can't rewrite the story. Not this time. Not this one." He put his arm around me. The porch light flickered once, then held. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked twice and stopped. We sat there until the jasmine smell got stronger, the way it always did after midnight. And then we went inside. Sunday morning, the day after the wedding. I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and a pen. Not my phone, not my laptop. Paper and pen, because some things should require the effort of your own handwriting. Some things should take time and leave marks. I wrote 3 drafts before I found the right one. The first was too angry. It said true things but said them with a blade, and I didn't want a blade. I wanted clarity. The second was too forgiving. It smoothed over things that shouldn't be smoothed, made accommodations for behavior that didn't deserve accommodation, and ended with an open door that hadn't been earned. The third one was honest. "Mom, I love you. I need you to read that first and hold on to it because the rest of this letter is going to be hard. You canceled my wedding. You called my husband damaged goods to his face. You told our entire town that I have a psychiatric history that makes me unstable. You came to my school and implied to my colleagues that I was having a breakdown. You posted on Facebook that I was getting married against medical advice. That last one was a lie. There was no doctor. There was no advice. You invented it. I am not writing this to punish you. I'm writing it because I think you deserve the truth plainly. I think you are afraid. I think you have been afraid since the day we buried Dad. Afraid of being alone, afraid of losing control, afraid that if I build my own life, there won't be room for you in it. I understand that fear. I have watched it drive you for almost 10 years. But I need you to hear this. There is room. There will always be room for you in my life. Just not like this. Not at this cost. I need distance. I don't know for how long. When you are ready to talk honestly, without using tears as leverage, without trying to control what gets said and what doesn't, I will be here. I will always be here. But the door opens from my side now. I love you. And love without limits isn't love. It's captivity. Saoirse, I folded it, put it in an envelope, wrote Emma Bryant on the front in my own handwriting. I drove to Frank's house. He was on his porch with coffee when I pulled up, still in the gray suit trousers and white shirt from the night before, jacket gone, top button undone. He watched me walk up the path. I handed him the envelope without explanation. He took it, read his sister-in-law's name on the front, looked at me. Will you give this to her today? Yes. I nodded, turned to go. Saoirse. I looked back. Frank was holding the envelope in both hands, looking at it. When he looked up, his jaw was working slightly, the way it did when he was holding something in. Your father would have written the same letter, he said, word for word. He delivered it that afternoon. I did not ask how she reacted. I was not ready to know. 1 week after the wedding, a Tuesday evening, Gwen Tasker's segment aired on WKBL TV during the 6 o'clock broadcast. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Gwen was a careful journalist. She did not name my mother. She described a family member who had canceled all wedding vendors 1 week before the ceremony by impersonating the bride. She showed footage of Cedarwood Hollow, the fairy lights, the wildflowers, the wooden chairs, Declan and me dancing under the oak trees. She interviewed Jolene, who sat in front of the camera with the same practical calm she brought to everything, and said, "When someone you love is in trouble, you don't wait to be asked. You just do what needs to be done." And she interviewed Dale Hutchins, who said he was glad his property could be useful. She interviewed Big Ray Fontenot, who said the brisket had turned out particularly well that afternoon, and he considered that a good sign. She did not interview me. I had asked her not to. I felt that I had already said what I needed to say, in vows, under oak trees, in front of 184 people who had shown up. But in a town of 6,000, subtraction is identification. The mother of the bride appeared nowhere in the wedding footage. A family member had sabotaged the vendors. There was only one family member who could have done it. Harlow did not need a name spelled out. By Wednesday morning, my mother's Facebook post, the one about medical advice, the one she had deleted 3 hours after posting it when she realized what was happening, had been screenshot by enough people that deleting it changed nothing. It was circulating through group chats and neighborhood pages alongside Gwen's segment. People were placing them side by side and drawing their own conclusions. The Harlow Women's Auxiliary, where my mother had held the position of corresponding secretary for 6 years, sent her a formal email, politely worded. The substance, they felt it was best if she took a leave of absence while things settled. Carol Ann at the salon told her at her next appointment that she thought Emma should speak to a professional. Not unkindly, Carol Ann was never unkind, but directly. The Sunday potluck invitations stopped arriving. The neighborly waves across driveways became less frequent. The phone calls tapered. My mother's currency in Harlow had always been reputation. The devoted widow, the selfless mother, the woman who held herself together through difficulty and expected nothing in return. That currency had been built carefully over years, and it was not gone. But it had been significantly devalued, and in a town this size, that was a change you felt in every interaction. Frank called me 2 weeks after the wedding. He had driven by my mother's house and seen the kitchen light on, and because he was the kind of man who did not abandon people even when they had done things to earn abandonment, he had knocked on the door and gone in. He told me she had called him the night before, crying. Said her daughter had been turned against her. Said Jolene had poisoned me. Said she was being punished for loving me too much. Frank had told her, plainly, that no one had turned me against her, that she had done it herself. She had hung up, called back 20 minutes later, calmer, trying a different argument. He wasn't buying any of them. She's not doing well, he told me on the phone. His voice was careful, the way it got when he was telling me something he wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I know, I said. She needs help, real help. I know that too. I meant what I said next, and I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to assume I didn't. If she agrees to see a therapist consistently, not once, not twice, but actually consistently, I will go to 1 session of family counseling with her. 1. That's my offer. It's not forgiveness. It's a condition. And it's the most I have right now. Frank was quiet for a moment. That's fair, he said. It's what I have, I said. It's what I can give. 3 weeks after the wedding, Declan and I sat down with the documentation Jolene had kept, 7 months of emails, call logs, and records of every interaction with every vendor. Emails where cancellations had been sent from my mother's device, signed with my name. Voicemails where her voice said, "This is Saoirse Bryant calling to cancel." The recording from 11 o'clock on that Wednesday night. We contacted each vendor. We did not threaten legal action. We presented the evidence, clearly, calmly, with the folder Jolene had maintained open on the table. And we let them reach their own conclusions. The florist at Sandy's Garden Studio reviewed the cancellation email alongside a sample of my actual email correspondence and called her attorney. Her attorney called us the following week. Sandy had not authorized the cancellation in good faith and was willing to return the deposit in full given the circumstances. $2,200. The catering company did the same review, the same call, the same conclusion. $1,800. The original venue, the Harlow Community Pavilion, had a stricter policy and a longer timeline for disputes. They could not offer a cash refund. But the manager, after hearing the full story and reviewing the voicemail, where my mother's voice identified itself as mine, offered a credit toward a future event. Full value. Declan said we'd use it for our first anniversary party. I laughed. A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. Total recovered $4,000. Not everything, but enough to breathe. We paid Jolene back the $3,800 within 6 weeks. She argued against it. I transferred the money without asking her permission a second time. Some debts aren't about money. They're about the kind of respect that can only be shown through action. 6 weeks after the wedding, I went into the workshop to find a box I'd stored there before the move, and I found a notebook on Declan's workbench that I had not seen before. It was a simple composition notebook, the kind you buy at a drugstore, with a rubber band around it. I should not have opened it, and I did open it, and I am glad I did. Every page had a chair on it, not a diagram, a description. Each of the chairs Declan had sourced and refinished for the wedding had its own entry, written in his careful, slightly cramped handwriting. Where he had found it, who had sold it to him, and why they were selling it. Chair 4, estate sale on Morrison Road. Family of a woman named Dolores who passed in February. Her daughter said she'd want it used. Chair 11, flea market off Route 9. Kid selling his grandmother's things. Said she was downsizing to assisted living. He looked embarrassed selling it. I paid him more than he asked. Chair 19, Dale's Barn. He built this one in 1987. Says it's the first chair he ever made, and it's not his best work, but it's held together 37 years, so it counts. I turned pages slowly. Then I found entry 27. Chair 27. Frank brought it in his truck on Tuesday morning. Said it was Hugh's. Said Hugh used to sit in it on his porch every evening after dinner for 22 years, just to be outside for a while. I put it in the front row, left side, next to where Frank will be standing. I stood in the workshop for a long time with the notebook in my hands. Hugh Bryant, my father, had been at my wedding, not invoked as a debt or a ghost or a reason for guilt. Just present, in the quiet, ordinary way of a man who had loved his daughter and wanted good things for her life. Declan hadn't mentioned it. He hadn't made a ceremony of it. He had just put the chair in the front row and said nothing because he understood that some gifts are better given without annotation. I heard him come in the back door. I was still holding the notebook when he appeared in the workshop doorway, sawdust on his sleeves, reading my face the way he always read my face, quickly and accurately and without making a performance of it. I wasn't going to tell you unless you found it, he said. I didn't want it to be a thing. I just wanted him to be there. I set the notebook down on the workbench. He was there, I said. Declan nodded. He was, he said. And then something else happened. Something none of us planned for or anticipated. 3 of the guests who had attended the wedding reached out to Declan in the 2 weeks following. They had sat in the refinished chairs or stood near them or noticed them in Gwen Tasker's footage, and they had questions. The Hendersons, a couple in their 60s who had known Declan through the woodworking guild, wanted a dining table for 8 refinished from pieces they'd inherited from her parents. Mrs. Paulson wanted a rocking chair for her front porch, something that would last, she said. She was 80 years old and not interested in anything that wouldn't outlive her. Gwen Tasker's producer wanted a bookshelf. Within a month, Declan's workshop, which had been running on inconsistent commissions, the kind of work that came and went without pattern, had a 3-month wait list. None of us engineered this. It was simply what happened when people saw real work done with care and wanted to know where it came from. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late November, one of those days that arrives gray and quiet, the last of the leaves down, the air carrying the first real cold of the season. I had just gotten home from school. I was walking up the front path with my bag on my shoulder and my key in my hand when I saw it. A cream-colored envelope, not in the mailbox. On the porch step, placed there by hand, set carefully against the riser so it wouldn't blow away. No return address. My name on the front in handwriting I would know anywhere, in any light, in any condition. The handwriting of the woman who had taught me to write letters. I picked it up, stood on the porch for a moment before I opened it. Inside, no letter, no words. One flower, pressed flat and dry between 2 sheets of wax paper. A black-eyed Susan, the flower that grows wild every summer along the roadsides on the edges of Harlow. The flower I had chosen for my wedding and that my mother had replaced with white lilies. The flower Jolene had brought back and that had been on every table at Cedarwood Hollow on the last Saturday in May. The yellow had faded to something softer. The petals had dried flat, losing their depth but keeping their shape. The whole thing was fragile in the way that preserved things are fragile. Handled carefully, it would last. Handled without care, it would not. I stood on the porch and held it for a long time. I did not call her. I was not ready. Perhaps she wasn't ready either. Perhaps that was all right. That readiness could take as long as it needed to take. That the door I had described in my letter could stand closed for a season without that meaning it was sealed. I carried the flower inside. I placed it on the bookshelf in the living room, leaning it against the frame of the photograph from the wedding. Declan and me under the white oak trees, fairy lights behind us, wildflowers everywhere, Frank's hand visible at the edge of the frame where he had stepped in for the photo and then stepped back. Declan came in from the workshop a little while later, sawdust on his forearms, the smell of walnut oil on his hands. He saw me standing at the bookshelf and came to stand beside me. He looked at the flower. He understood immediately. He always understood immediately. That was one of the first things I had loved about him. "You okay?" he said. I turned to look at him. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." Through the kitchen window, the last of the afternoon light was crossing the backyard in a long, low angle. The workshop light was still on. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard next door. A mockingbird somewhere in the pecan tree was running through its repertoire. Cardinal, blue jay, something I didn't recognize. The way mockingbirds do, endlessly cycling through borrowed songs. I don't need my mother to be perfect. I have thought about this a lot since then. About what I need from her and what I don't and what the difference looks like in practice. I don't need perfection. I don't need her to become someone other than who she is. I need her to stop treating my wholeness as a threat to her survival. That's the minimum. And for the first time, I am not afraid to hold it. The door is still there. I check on it sometimes the way you check on something you've planted and aren't sure will survive the winter. But I don't stand at it waiting anymore. That's the change. I'm not telling you this story so that you hate my mother. She is a woman in pain. She lost her husband too young, and she never learned the difference between holding on and holding hostage. She loved me in the way that some people love, completely, fiercely, and without enough room in that love for the beloved to be a separate person. Her grief was real. Her fear was real. But real pain does not grant the right to destroy someone else's life, and neither does anyone else's. If you have someone in your life, a mother, a father, a sister, a partner, anyone, who uses love like a leash, who makes you feel guilty for wanting air, who punishes you for growing, for building, for becoming something they can't control, I want you to hear me directly, one person to another, through whatever screen or speaker or set of earphones is carrying this to you right now. You are not ungrateful for wanting to breathe. You are not selfish for saying no. You are not a bad daughter or a bad son or a bad anything for building a life that doesn't orbit someone else's fear. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors, and you get to hold the key. I did not scheme a revenge. I did not plan a takedown. I got lucky. I had Jolene, who had been building a safety net beneath me for 7 months without being asked. I had Declan, who recorded a phone call and said nothing about it until the moment had passed and I was ready to hear it. I had Frank, who showed up in a gray suit with polished shoes and red eyes and said, "Make it count." I had Dale Hutchins and Big Ray Fontenot and Pete Dunbar and Candace Odom and Theo Aldridge and Coach Webb and Mrs. Paulson and 179 other people who drove to an address they'd never heard of on a Saturday afternoon because a text message told them to trust the plan. If you don't have a Jolene right now, if there is no one in your corner building the backup plan, then I want you to be your own Jolene. Start small. Make the plan. Protect the version of yourself that someone is trying to erase. And if you are someone's Jolene, if you are the one holding the folder, making the calls, spending your own money on someone else's future because you made a quiet promise to yourself in a bathroom or a parking lot or a hospital waiting room, I want you to know that what you do matters more than you will ever be thanked for. It held us together. Everything held. My name is Saoirse Bryant Mercer. I am 28 years old. I teach 3rd grade in a small town in North Carolina, and I come home every afternoon to a house that smells like wood smoke and linseed oil and coffee, and I am, for the first time in my life, completely and entirely at home in my own story. The Black-Eyed Susan is still on the bookshelf. I walk past it every day. Thank you for staying with me through all 3 parts of this story. If it reached you, if something in it found a place it needed to find, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Every single subscriber means that stories like this one travel further, find more people, do more of what stories are supposed to do. If you have your own version of this, your own Emma, your own empty lot, your own Jolene, I want to hear it. Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And wherever you are right now, whatever your version of Harlow looks like, I hope you find your Cedarwood Hollow. I'll see you in the next one.